My husband's best friend had made a bet with him I'd cry the moment they handed me divorce papers during Christmas dinner. Women are so predictable, he had laughed. But I didn't cry. I signed the papers right away, then calmly handed them a gift-wrapped box. Their grins faded the second they opened it. Think she'll cry when she reads them? His best friend had joked from the living room. They didn't realize I was standing just down the hall, holding a tray of drinks. I froze in place, breath stuck, heart racing, pulse loud in my ears. Ethan's voice echoed, smooth and smug. She'll crumble. They always do. That happened 5 days before Christmas. Before I go on, thank you for being here. If you believe no woman should feel powerless in her own home, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us reach others who need strength, not silence. Now, let's continue. But the story doesn't start there. No, it started long before they bet on my heartbreak. It started with laughter. Always laughter. You know I could leave you tomorrow, right? Ethan used to joke at dinner parties, smiling like it was just a game as he rested his hand on my shoulder. Everyone laughed. So did I. But something inside me curled up tight, like a knot beneath my ribs. No one noticed how often he said it, or how easily. No one saw when I stopped wearing my red dress because he once said, trying too hard, aren't we? Or when I started studying his tone before speaking in public, praying I wouldn't spark one of his casual monologues about all my flaws. He never yelled, never lifted a hand. Ethan was too clever for that. His words were like blades coated in honey. Don't embarrass me in front of my boss. You should be grateful I haven't left. I mean, really, what else could you even do without me? Each remark came with a smirk, a laugh, and the soft clink of his whiskey glass. I'd smile back. I had learned to. At first, I even defended him. He's just sarcastic. I explained to Lily, my childhood best friend, after she overheard one of his cutting remarks at a barbecue. He doesn't mean it like that. But Lily didn't look convinced. He doesn't have to mean it, she said quietly. You look like you're disappearing. Maybe I was. I stopped posting on social media, stopped going to book club, ignored more and more calls from my sister. My world slowly shrank, wrapped around Ethan's moods, his routines, his limits. He liked control, quiet control. When my mom visited, he'd make a point of loudly complaining how messy the kitchen was. If I forgot the dry cleaning, I'd hear him mutter under his breath, useless. Not loud enough to call him out, just enough for me to hear it. Still, I convinced myself this was just marriage. Maybe not a fairy tale, but something solid. At least he didn't cheat. At least he wasn't violent. At least. Then came the gala. 2 glasses of champagne in at his company fundraiser. He leaned close, his eyes glassy with alcohol and disdain. You're just like the rest of them, he hissed as a woman passed by. Always wanting more, always needy, always clinging. I went cold. My cheeks burned with silent shame. I didn't ask what set him off. I never did anymore. When we got home, he slammed the door, headed straight for the liquor. I followed calmly, poured him another drink, handed it to him with a perfect smile. You know, I said softly, maybe we should actually sign something. You're always joking about leaving, why not make it official? He laughed loud, careless. You think I need a prenup to protect my fantasy football money? He scribbled his name on a napkin. There, go get it notarized if you're that paranoid. Then he passed out on the couch. By morning, he forgot all about it. But I didn't. Within 24 hours, I had that napkin notarized. Lily helped me. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a pen with quiet understanding. I placed that document into a fireproof envelope and tucked it deep inside a filing cabinet behind a folder marked tax receipts 202. I even emailed a scanned copy to a private email Lily had created for me years ago just in case. That night, everything looked normal. I cooked dinner, asked Ethan about his day, laughed at his work stories, cleaned up while he stared at his phone. He didn't notice the change. I wasn't scared anymore. Not angry either. I was calculating. In the weeks that followed, I changed. Not outwardly. Quietly. I began keeping a journal, not the pretty kind with flowers on the cover, but a plain spiral notebook I hid beneath the mattress. In it, I recorded every comment, every mood swing. The night he stumbled in at 1:15 a.m., smelling of tequila and someone else's perfume. I wasn't making a plan. Not yet. But I was preparing. The company's New Year kickoff event. He joked in front of a room full of new hires. My wife's hobby is overspending. I didn't cry. I excused myself and stared at my reflection in the restroom mirror. He thinks I'm weak, I thought, breakable. And he wasn't wrong. Not before, but I was changing. A few months later, I found a receipt in his jeans to wine glasses, strawberries, and a fancy hotel room. Valentine's Day. He had told me he was out of town for work. I didn't confront him. I scanned it, stored it, noted it down. A routine began. Evidence, not emotion. One evening at dinner he said, if we split, you'd come crawling back. You can't even fix the Wi-Fi without me. I smiled, poured him more wine, and said, that's true. I didn't believe it anymore. There's a certain silence in homes like ours, not calm but stretched, like a thread pulled too tightly. Every room echoed with things we never said. Every smile I wore came with nausea. Then came the dream. His voice haunted me even there. You'll have nothing. I woke up soaked in sweat, heart pounding, and something inside whispered, that's not true anymore. I had the paper, the proof, the time. That night, I stopped pretending. From that point on, I wasn't his wife. I was his shadow, calm, composed, and quietly preparing. That napkin he laughed over, that was my foundation. I didn't know when or how, but I knew one day he'd pull the same trick and I'd be ready. I stood in Lily's office, the light buzzing softly above us. I handed her the document, Ethan's signature still clear across the bottom. He did this willingly? She asked, brows raised. I nodded, silent. Lily leaned back in her chair, adjusted her glasses, and read. After a while, she looked up, something between pity and pride in her eyes. It's brilliant, she said, tapping the page. He handed you the knife. Now you just need to choose when to use it. I sat across from her, hands locked tightly in my lap. I don't want revenge, I said. I just want to feel safe. You will, she replied. But let's reinforce it so it holds even if he files first. And we did. She wrote up an addendum, sharpened every line, closed every loophole, made sure that if Ethan tried to spin the story, he'd be caught in his own web. He'd end up caught in the very trap his own arrogance built. We included terms he'd never dream of, challenging spousal protections, a clear financial split, undeniable proof that he signed everything willingly, his signature, his handwriting, the date, all of it without any force or pressure. Just one smug moment that turned permanent. Lily handed me a flash drive, a printed version, and a look I hadn't seen from her since we were young, plotting silly pranks behind the school library. Only this time, it wasn't mischief, it was strategy, it was war, and we were in it for the long game. I'll keep a copy too, she said as I stood up to leave, just in case. That evening, I walked into the house and found Ethan glued to the football game, a beer in one hand, socks flung messily across the living room. I stopped for a moment at the doorway, watching him laugh at the replay on TV. The noise echoed off the walls like some leftover soundtrack from a life I no longer recognized as mine. Dinner's almost ready, I said. He grunted without looking away. That was the start of my performance. And I played it better than I ever imagined I could. I became the woman he always bragged about, refined, pleasant, composed. When he mocked my spending in front of friends, I giggled along. When he showed off about his promotion at the company's annual celebration, I kissed his cheek and toasted with a dazzling smile, even though I knew full well that promotion was just a polite way of being removed from his team. I stopped arguing when he was cruel. Instead, I praised his wine choices, his favorite restaurants, even the new cologne he wore. Though it smelled nothing like the one he used back when we first met. He thought I was softening, but I wasn't. I was sharpening. Ethan began to let his guard down again. Convinced the fire in me had died, his behavior shifted, sloppier, bolder. He came home late without explanation, left his phone face up on the counter. Messages popped up briefly from unnamed contacts. One caught my eye from me. Tonight, same hotel. He claimed he was going to the gym. 10 minutes after he left, I opened our shared laptop, synced his phone data to my cloud folder, and forwarded the screenshots to the email Lily had created for me. No tears. No reaction. I went to the kitchen and made lasagna his favorite. He came home to a hot dinner and a warm smile. Said it was the best meal he'd had all week. A few weeks later, during a barbecue, his best friend Dylan pulled him aside near the grill. Beer sloshed from his cup as he laughed. If you ever leave her, she'll fall apart, man. She's too dependent. You've got it made. I stood just a few feet away, arranging the fruit tray with care. I didn't flinch. Instead, I arranged strawberries in a perfect spiral, one red slice at a time, Moments later, Ethan walked over and wrapped his arm around my waist, kissed my cheek like he hadn't disappeared without a word the night before. "You look beautiful today," he murmured. I smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart." The very next day, I started recording his phone calls, only the ones that mattered. The quiet ones where he let something slip, laughed too hard, said things no loving husband should ever say. Each file was labeled by date, stored with precision. I felt like a secret agent in my own house. But it wasn't revenge I was after. Not then. I was building a parachute, carefully, quietly, because when you live in a home built on cracks, you don't wait for it to collapse. You learn where to place your feet and how to jump. I even bought a planner and started tracking everything. A small X for nights he came home late, a star for suspicious expenses, a dot for provable lies. To anyone else, it looked like meal plans or shopping lists. To me, it was a map. Eventually, I stopped reacting altogether. I became a mirror showing him only what he wanted to see. A woman who had given up. A woman who'd shrunk just enough to fit into the box he designed for me. And so he got comfortable. He began leaving stacks of cash in plain sight, withdrew large amounts without explanation, traveled on business trips with luggage full of cologne and shirts he never wore on Zoom. One day, I found lipstick marked on a receipt. The shade was called Temptress Red. I didn't cry. I made a note. The final confirmation came 2 weeks before Christmas. Ethan had been drinking and eventually passed out on the couch, his phone unlocked in his hand. I glanced down and saw a message thread light up. She has no idea. I'm filing on Christmas. Want front row seats? There was a laughing emoji and a gif of a woman crying into a tissue. No shaking. No nausea. I took a screenshot, emailed it, then deleted it from the chat. Later that night, I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling. I thought about Christmas candles, cranberries, a carved turkey. He was planning my collapse like some party trick. He thought I'd fall to pieces, but I had already picked the date, the setting, the witnesses. He wasn't the only one with a performance rehearsed, because he'd forgotten one very important thing. When you hand someone a knife, you don't get to act surprised when they learn how to use it. Christmas dinner looked picture perfect, like a scene straight from a glossy magazine. Everything was curated, warm in all the wrong ways. A glowing garland framed the windows. Candles flickered in glass jars, and the roast turkey shimmered under Ethan's carving knife. He wore the maroon sweater I had gifted him last year, tiny reindeer stitched across the front. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had dressed the very man who was plotting my undoing. My sister Beth moved around the room, pouring mugs of her signature mulled wine. Her cheeks were flushed, half from the heat, half from the drinks. Ethan's parents were talking about their retirement plans. Everyone looked so relaxed, so blissfully unaware. I moved through the room like a hostess running on instinct, refilling glasses, offering smiles that never quite reached my eyes. Underneath my dress, my legs trembled not with fear, but with anticipation. My heartbeat thudded in time with a single word: tonight, tonight, tonight. Ethan caught my eye while slicing the turkey and gave me a knowing wink. That smug, overly confident expression, the same one he wore just before closing a sales deal, was back. I returned the gesture with a soft smile of my own, warm, unreadable. Let him think he'd won. Best bird yet, his father announced between bites. Collie's perfected the recipe, Ethan added, laying the platter down like it was a trophy. She's had plenty of practice. What is this, our 7th Christmas? 8th, I replied quietly, settling into my seat across from him. He lifted his glass. Well, here's to 8 more, or however long we last. That edge in his voice was unmistakable, cruel, but coated in just enough humor to pass as harmless. Laughter echoed around the table. I smiled too, brushing an invisible crumb from my napkin. As plates emptied and the wine took effect, I saw Ethan's best friend, Dylan, lean in and whisper something to him. He was already tipsy, eyes glazed, grin uneven. Ethan nodded and slowly stood, tapping his glass with a butter knife. All right, he said, clearing his throat. Before dessert, I have a little something for my beautiful wife. I glanced at Beth. She smiled warmly, maybe expecting a necklace or a handwritten love note. Instead, Ethan pulled out a plain white envelope from his blazer and walked over, wearing the grin of a man who thought this was the highlight of the evening. Merry Christmas, babe, he said, placing it in front of me. Dylan chuckled quietly. No one else joined in. The envelope was out of place, no ribbon, no card. I looked at it for a moment, then calmly opened it. The room went silent. My eyes moved to the top line. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Already signed. Already filed. He'd even highlighted a section at the bottom like a school kid proud of his homework. I glanced up. His grin was wide, expectant. So I smiled back. Thank you, I said sweetly. Then I paused. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. Dylan shifted in his seat, now clearly uncomfortable. I reached into my clutch, pulled out a silver pen, clicked it open, and signed the papers with one fluid stroke. I dated it, capped the pen, and handed the envelope back. Done. I could feel Beth's eyes fixed on me, stunned. Ethan blinked, clearly caught off guard. That's it? He asked, trying to sound casual. That's it, I repeated, sliding the envelope toward him. Without hesitating, I bent down and lifted a gold-wrapped box from beneath the table. I placed it neatly between his dinner plate and his inflated ego. What's this? He asked. Your real present, I said. He hesitated, then tore through the wrapping paper to reveal a leather folder. The moment he read the first line, the color drained from his face, his lips parted, silently mouthing the words again and again. Dated. Notarized. Crystal clear. The prenup he had laughed his way through. Signed by the very same hand now clutching the table in disbelief. What is that? Dylan asked. Leaning in, Ethan said nothing. So I answered. It's the agreement Ethan signed almost a year ago, I said. It's been revised, reinforced, and filed. I filed first, Ethan interrupted as if that changed anything. Which makes it binding under your terms, I replied with a steady smile. Every clause, every asset. You gave it to me. Dylan's jaw dropped slightly. Holy, you okay, man? Beth's husband asked from across the table, but Ethan didn't respond. His eyes were still glued to the document. The same eyes that once scanned business contracts and spreadsheets for fine print had missed the biggest clause in his own life. I reached into my purse one last time. There's something else, I said, placing a small, square envelope on the table thinner than the first. He stared at it like it might explode, then opened it slowly, brows furrowing. Inside was a sonogram photo. Ethan looked at it, then at me. I'm pregnant, I said. 8 weeks today. His face twitched just barely. His eyes scanned the table, searching for anything familiar. For a moment, he even smiled reflexively, but that smile collapsed under the weight of realization. Prenup, pregnancy, assets, custody. It all landed like a boulder on his chest. You planned this, he whispered, voice barely audible. I locked eyes with him, calm, cold. You bet I'd cry, I said. You laughed, called me predictable. So no, Ethan, I didn't plan. I prepared. Silence fell thick, suffocating. Not the kind that crashes, the kind that creeps. I took a sip of wine. Cinnamon clung to my lips. Ethan's mother gently pushed her chair back, her face pale. Beth reached under the table and squeezed my hand, silent. Support. Dylan tried to say something, but ended up turning away, ashamed. Ethan kept staring at the prenup like he could somehow rewrite it through sheer willpower. He couldn't. I stood up slowly, gathering the dessert plates that still sat untouched. My hands were steady, my breath calm. Apple or pecan? I asked the room. No one answered. Ethan remained frozen, seated in the ruins of his own design. And me? I wasn't broken. I was just getting started. Ethan sat there, shoulders tight, jaw slightly open like his words had stopped mid-thought. You planned this, he said again, but I hardly heard him. He was still focused on the prenup, like it was some ancient curse written in his own hand. The room was painfully still. Only the soft crackle of the fireplace and the faint clink of a spoon from the kitchen remained. Even the ornaments on the tree seemed to have gone. Still. Then his eyes dropped to the sonogram still resting on his lap. He stared at it like it might vanish if he blinked. If he blinked, he might have missed it, but the slightest twitch moved across his jaw. He began, but I stood taller. No, I said just one word, calm and firm. He blinked again, slower this time, as if trying to figure out which version of me he was suddenly facing. His voice cracked, barely holding steady. You don't have to do this. Oh, but I'm not doing anything, I replied, lifting my wine glass without even looking at him. You already did. To my right, his mother sat hunched forward, lips pressed into a hard line. The pearls around her neck trembled slightly with each shallow breath. His father had taken off his glasses and was cleaning them with the corner of his napkin even though they weren't dirty. Beth's husband reached for the wine again, then changed his mind. Dylan, still slouched uncomfortably at the far end of the table, scratched the back of his neck. The weight of his smugness was caving in on him now, like a collapsing roof. Across the table, my cousin Rachel sat wide-eyed, her spoon frozen midair between her mouth and a bowl of untouched sweet potatoes. I scanned every face, soaking in their reactions: disbelief, shame, confusion. It was better than any speech I could have given. Their silence? That was my standing ovation. Ethan leaned back in his chair and ran a hand through his hair, a move I'd seen a dozen times before. When he realized he was no longer in control, when his boss cornered him, when a deal failed, when there was no one left to blame, he looked around as if waiting for someone to save him. I didn't, he began. You thought I'd beg, I said softly. My voice didn't shake. My hands stayed steady. You thought I'd fall apart. He looked at me again, eyes narrowed. I added. Until today. He swallowed hard, and that's when I saw it: real fear. Not the dramatic kind. Not yelling. Not throwing things. Just a flicker of something unfamiliar in a man who had always treated consequences as optional. He opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, his phone buzzed on the polished wood of the table. He glanced at it. Buzz. Another. A third. He slowly picked it up and unlocked the screen with a trembling thumb. It was an email from Lily. Subject: prenup confirmation, legally binding. I watched his face crumble in slow, silent horror as he read the words. Each line peeled a layer off his pride. He scrolled fast. His lips parted. His skin went pale. The bottom was Lily's signature, the firm's letterhead, and her signature touch of professional elegance. She'd even attached copies with metadata, timestamps, and backups. Tell her it doesn't count, he muttered under his breath, clutching the phone like it might change reality. Buzz. This time it was from his father's email. Subject: forwarded. Signed prenup. Dated docs. FYI. The same man Ethan once referred to as a legal dinosaur had just received proof that his golden boy had handed away everything voluntarily. Ethan lowered the phone like it had burned him. I turned to Beth, who had been silently watching everything unfold. I could go for something sweet now, I said with a lightness in my voice. Could you pass the pie? Which one? She asked, quickly recovering. Apple. With whipped cream, please. She began slicing as I walked to the buffet and grabbed a clean plate. I could feel Ethan's eyes still trailing me, confused, shocked, frozen. I returned to my seat beside my sister and gently placed the pie on the table. Then I turned to Ethan. Just once more. I'll be changing the locks tomorrow, I said, plainly. He looked like he'd been slapped. I picked up my fork, took a bite, and smiled. Not to perform, not to provoke, just because the cinnamon was warm, the crust was soft, and the taste reminded me of something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Ethan shoved his chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly. You think you've won, he said. I didn't reply. He didn't deserve one. He stormed out, leaving the prenup, the sonogram, and the last of his dignity on the table. No one said a word, at least not for a few seconds. Then Beth exhaled beside me. I always hated that sweater, she muttered. Laughter sparked, tentative at first, then a ripple through the room. Rachel laughed nervously. Even Ethan's mother let out a soft chuckle, hiding her face with a napkin though. She quickly turned away. I took another bite of pie and leaned into Beth. Merry Christmas, I whispered. She rested her head gently on my shoulder. There were no fireworks, no yelling, no dishes thrown, just a quiet dismantling of control measured in glances, in paperwork, and one perfect slice of dessert. The room didn't shift that night because I disrupted it. It shifted because I reclaimed it. Beth stayed over after Ethan slammed the front door. She didn't ask. She just looked at me and said, "You're not waking up alone tomorrow." That was enough. We slept in the guest room. I curled on my side, one hand resting over the small rise of my belly. She reached across and touched my hand gently in the dark, silent and warm. Only then did I realize how long I'd been holding my breath over the years. That night, I finally exhaled, and it felt like I was breathing for the first time in someone else's body. Someone I hadn't known in a long time. Myself. By morning, Ethan was gone. No note, no call, just silence. I came downstairs to a cold coffee pot, a locked front door, and his keys missing from the hook. I made myself breakfast for the first time in weeks without flinching at the sound of the toaster or the clink of my fork. I had the locksmith on the phone. Emergency or standard change? He asked. Standard, I said, then paused. But make it quick. He came that afternoon, a quiet man with kind eyes who didn't ask any questions when I handed him Ethan's old keys and said, "Make sure none of these work anymore." When he left, I stood in the foyer holding a new key, something I hadn't truly owned alone in years. Not the house. Not yet. But the feeling, the certainty. That evening, I moved into the master bedroom. It still held traces of Ethan's cologne, expensive, sharp. I opened every window, letting the December wind cut through the air. I stripped the bed, stuffed the sheets into trash bags, and found a box of sandalwood candles in the closet. I used to love them. He'd claimed they gave him headaches. I lit 3, placed them on the dresser, and watched the light dance across the walls like they were dancing only for me. The next day, his mail started arriving. Red stamps screamed across envelopes. Final notice. Past due. Immediate action required. I stacked them neatly by the door. Didn't forward a single one. That evening, Lily called. Her voice was practically glowing. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Actually, Ethan's lawyer called this morning. You should have seen his face when he realized what you've been holding on to." I smiled into the phone, curled beneath a blanket. "Is it official?" I asked. "He lost 70% overnight," she replied. And with a baby on the way, she paused, letting the weight hang in the air. "He's going to have to write a check so big, it'll need a payment plan." My smile grew, not because of the money, not even close, but because, for the first time in years, I could sit in my own living room without bracing myself for battle. "I'm proud of you," Lily added softly, and those words nearly cracked something inside me. "Thank you," I whispered, "for staying, even when I didn't know I needed someone. You've always been strong, Collie. You just finally let yourself believe it." The fallout came quietly, like snow melting. Not an avalanche. No chaos. Some friends unfollowed me. Some picked sides. A few sent hesitant texts filled with disclaimers, "I'm not taking sides." But others were bolder. One message came from a woman I hadn't spoken to in years. It simply said, "I wish I had your strength." A bouquet of peonies. Arrived a few days later. No sender. Just a note. About time. It was from Ethan's assistant, Claire. I smiled and placed the bouquet on the mantel. Of course Claire knew. It was only a matter of time before word spread around his office. The same man who used to joke about training wives like interns suddenly had no audience left. Even his best friend Dylan stopped laughing in meetings. The remarks stopped. So did the swagger. Apparently, his team had started noticing how he was leaving early, muttering under his breath, missing deadlines. Later that week, I overheard Beth's husband on the phone. "No man, he's been off, like haunted." Haunted. Good. The man who once said I'd be nothing without him now ate lunch alone, forgotten in a place that used to cheer for his cruelty. As for me, I started buying lavender soap again. I painted the nursery a soft sage green, a color Ethan once called pointless. I hung twinkle lights across the window and placed a stuffed giraffe in the corner. After dinner, I lit candles. I sipped herbal tea in the sunroom barefoot, unbothered. One night, while folding laundry, I caught myself humming. It startled me. I hadn't done that since our second anniversary. I bought new sheets, white with tiny golden stars, and slept diagonally across the bed just because I could. One afternoon, I passed Ethan on the street. He was walking out of a bank, barking into his phone, clearly irritated. He didn't notice me. Or maybe he did, and just didn't know what to say. I kept walking. Later that evening, Lily sent me a screenshot. Ethan's name had been quietly removed from his firm's quarterly newsletter. I replied with a single thumbs up emoji, then made a cup of tea and watched the wind play through the curtains. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not really. It was about small things. Freedom, peace, the slow, steady rebuilding of a life that now fully belonged to me. The first time I felt her kick, I was barefoot in the kitchen, humming along to a Nina Simone record while slicing peaches. For a pie. Tea first. I thought I imagined it a soft flutter, like wings brushing gently from the inside. Then it came again. I dropped the knife. Both hands flew to my stomach. I stood there in silence, stunned and smiling. Tears slipped out before I could stop them. It wasn't just a kick. It was a message, a rhythm. You're not alone. She was real. She was growing strong, and so was I. That night, I opened my journal for the first time in weeks. I kept the entry, short but deliberate. This baby will never hear yelling through a door, never feel like they're walking on glass. Never confuse fear for love. I underlined that last line twice. My world had become smaller, but warmer, softer, in all the right places. When I entered my second trimester, my cousin Elena moved into the guest room. She came with 2 suitcases and a basket of homemade lavender muffins, wearing her usual oversized hoodie and her signature gold hoop earrings. "I'm not letting you do this alone," she said. "Also, someone's gotta stop you from eating pickles and ice cream at the same time." We settled into a rhythm almost instantly. She worked remotely from the kitchen table, wore fuzzy socks in July, and never asked about Ethan unless I brought him up, which I rarely did. That part of the story wasn't worth repeating anymore. Lily came by every few days with groceries, casseroles, and baby name books full of sticky notes. On page 37 she scribbled, "Do not name her Tiffany, not because it's a bad name, but because, as Lily once told me over tea, I had a Tiffany in middle school who cut my hair with safety scissors during art class." We laughed harder those months than I had in years. We didn't talk about lawyers, or court dates, or what Ethan left behind. We talked about recipes, crib colors, which stroller folded the easiest, whether Lily's ex was secretly stalking her, Pinterest boards. For the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel threatening. It felt shared. The baby's room came together slowly. I painted the walls a buttery yellow and filled it with thrifted furniture. I sanded and repainted myself one layer at a time. A rocking chair arrived in a massive box. Elena spent 3 hours trying to put it together before slamming the instructions down and declaring, "This is your villain origin story." We laughed until our faces hurt. One quiet Sunday, I pulled a box from the back of the hallway closet. I knew what it was the moment I touched it: the satin ribbon, the scent of cedar, our wedding photos. I sat on the living room floor and opened the lid. There we were, frozen smiles, vows wrapped in white lace, his hands around my waist, my eyes full of dreams that had long since turned to ash. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I slid each photo into its own envelope and labeled the box, "To release." Then I drove to the donation center, handed it over without fanfare, and walked out, feeling lighter. On the way home, I stopped at a bookstore, picked up a journal with a leather cover and thick ivory pages. That night, I opened it to a fresh first page and wrote, "Plans that are only mine." I wrote in it every evening, sometimes long thoughts, sometimes just a single word, but each one was mine. When Christmas came again, the house smelled like cinnamon and pine, not tension. The dining table was smaller, cozier. No flashy centerpiece. No wine glasses used as shields or weapons. There was laughter, real laughter, the kind that bubbles up without trying. Beth brought her toddler, who kept dropping mashed potatoes on the floor and shouting, "Oh," like a magician pulling off a trick. My dad carved the turkey. Elena attempted and failed to make vegan gravy. Lily brought a date, her first in over a year. And I didn't feel jealous. I felt whole. Next to my nephew's seat stood a brand new high chair, white, with little yellow stars, and sitting in it, the love of my life, my daughter. She had Ethan's eyes, maybe, but everything else, all mine. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold. Her tiny fingers gripped the tray as she babbled nonsense with the passion of a presidential speech. I didn't watch the door. I didn't tiptoe around my tone. I didn't rehearse replies or worry that a compliment might be a trap. I was present. Every bite, every glance, every story passed around the table felt like something more than survival. It felt like beginning again. After dinner, I curled up in the armchair by the fireplace, my daughter sleeping soundly on my chest, her tiny breaths warming the front of my sweater. Everyone else had drifted into the kitchen or out for a walk, but I stayed holding her, wrapped in a peace that once felt like fantasy. I took a sip of cocoa and whispered softly to her, "He said I'd be nothing without him." She stirred. Her fingers curled slightly. I kissed her forehead and smiled. "Turns out," I murmured, "I'm everything without him."